Thanks to their resurgence in pop culture with movies, TV shows, and video games, everybody wants to be as cool as Vikings. But it is important to mention that such a fantasy is based on a highly watered-down version of kings that the media created. The Vikings had participated in weird traditions that most people nowadays would consider barbaric. Life was a lot more disturbing than just looting and pillaging Britain's shores now and then. Welcome to Nutty History, and today, let's find out weird things that were considered normal in the age of the Vikings. The reason Vikings were so good at overwhelming their enemies during an invasion was how they would bash into the enemy lines like wrecking balls. This reckless method of attack is why the word berserker is now closely associated with Vikings. If you saw a Viking berserker charging at you, you will definitely soil your pants because of how inhuman and terrifying they looked at that moment. The secret behind their appearance of being in such a rage-filled trance was in fact that they were literally in a daze because of shrooms. Yep, good old magic mushrooms. It was common among Vikings to eat psilocybin mushrooms to make them numb towards pain and violence. Sweden, Denmark, and Norway are native to these hallucinogenic mushrooms, and they seeped into Viking religious rituals which later became battle customs. Now we let you decide what's more wacky to do while being high: slaughtering people and risking your life to plunder slaves, or watching The Wizard of Oz while listening to Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. Late medieval and early modern history is filled with tales of duels on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. Thanks to a certain musical, the duel between Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr is quite a trending topic in history these days. And let's not forget the legendary duel scenes from the Kubrick classic, Barry Lyndon. Very few people know how dueling became a thing. Well, like a lot of other things related to early modern Europe, dueling was also a gift of the Viking invaders. Back in the Viking Age, they were known as HOLMGANG. Duels were an integral part of a weird justice system of Danes, Swedes, and Norwegians. You could get away with cutting someone's throat, but not cutting someone's pocket. Many situations of dispute and crime were resolved by the accuser challenging the accused to a battle. In many circumstances, this was a battle to the death. Accepting the duel was a matter of honor. Refusing would mean confessing to the crime that one had been accused of. Same goes for if one fails to show up at the time of the duel. But this barbaric custom had its set of rules and regulations which were decided by the challenger. So, not that ironclad, right? The word Viking is a bit of a catch-all term for groups of seafaring people in the 8th to 11th centuries who came from modern-day Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. These guys were traders and explorers, but more famously, raiders and pirates. They didn't actually wear horned hats and, quite frankly, resented the stereotype. One of the most famous Vikings was the awesomely named Eric the Red. Eric founded a Viking settlement on an island northwest of Iceland, and in what might be history's first advertising scam, he named this frigid, icy country Greenland to entice people to move there. Well, now that Eric the Red and the other Vikings had their cozy little colony set up in Greenland, they needed to start making bank. Perhaps it was Eric's skills in false advertising, but they soon began trading certain valuable exports with other regions. The Vikings had a good deal going with the southern European nations, and one of the most demanded products were rare, expensive, and magical unicorn horns. Now, we all know what a unicorn is, right? Big fancy horse, one long horn, not actually real.
I'm pretty sure none of that's real.
You're not real, man.
A passion for bronies and a beverage source for Lord Voldemort. The fantastical creature has captured the imagination for thousands of years. It is mentioned in ancient Greek histories, Indian and Chinese mythology, and the Bible. Unicorns go way back. According to ancient legend, unicorns were wild, vicious animals, a far cry from the sparkly cartoon creatures we think of today. Unicorns could never be captured alive because if you cornered one, it would throw itself over a cliff, horn first, and the beast's magical horn would absorb all of the force of the fall. I'm guessing unicorns have horns made of vibranium. But most importantly, for the Vikings, unicorn horns were said to have magical healing powers. The horn of a unicorn was supposed to be able to detect and even neutralize poison. It was said that if you touched a unicorn horn to a plate of food and the food started to smoke, the dish was poisoned. Unicorn horns were also soaked in water to create an infusion to cure leprosy, or ground into powder to treat snake bites or the plague. King James I of England once realized he'd been sold some bad horn when he poisoned one of his own servants to test its anti-poison powers. Dude, always get a receipt. Despite this, European royalty as a whole could not get enough of these unicorn horns, giving them lavish gifts and making them into scepters, sword hilts, and crowns. The throne that is used to this day by the King of Denmark was said to be made of unicorn horns. Okay, that sounds so much cooler than the Iron Throne. Because of these royal bronies and medical quackery, the demand for unicorn horns only grew over the centuries. By the Renaissance, a horn was worth 10 times its weight in gold. Obviously, what Vikings were selling were not the horns of some magical horses. Perhaps Vikings may have mistaken them for magical horns when they first discovered them washing up on their shores of Greenland. But the Vikings should have realized pretty quickly that these were not actually from horses. They weren't even horns. What the Vikings were pawning off as horns were the tusks of narwhals, a kind of whale. The word narwhal is Old Norse and means corpse whale. The Vikings thought the animal's gray, mottled skin looked like a dead body, and as usual, they believed in giving things the most death metal sounding names possible. Male narwhals have one long, specialized canine tooth that pokes right through the upper lip in a fashionable natural lip piercing, and conveniently looks exactly like the spiral horn of the legendary unicorn. The exact purpose behind this crazy tooth is a bit of a mystery. Since only males usually have tusks, it's probably a mating display, like the antlers of a deer. But the tusks are also loaded with sensory nerves, meaning that they can be used to sense the environment around them. Who knows, maybe the narwhals use them to detect poison. Vikings sold these narwhal tusks as unicorn horns to anybody who would buy them. If someone discovered that these actually came from a whale, they had a perfectly responsible response. The horns were not from a whale, but a sea unicorn. Duh! This is actually not as lame of an excuse as it sounds. In ancient times, people believed that every creature on land had a counterpart beneath the sea. Hey, we got sea lions, right? Seahorses? And everybody knows about mermaids. Alas, as always, science marches on. In 1638, a zoologist named Old Worm set out to find the truth. Old Worm, whose name has like equal but opposite energy to Eric the Red, cataloged our narwhal skull and stated definitely it was a type of whale. Still, he was willing to consider that despite the horn's non-unicorn status, the legend of its powers might hold true. Old Worm was a dedicated scientist, so he ground up some narwhal horn, then promptly poisoned his pets. Though slightly nicer than King James, this was still pretty rude. The narwhal horn didn't cure the animals, putting an end to the scam once and for all. Just kidding. People continued to sell narwhal tusk as unicorn horns for another 100 years or so. The fraudsters even branched out and sold ground-up deer antlers and cow horns as phony corn horn. Still, as time went on and the scientific method spread, chemistry finally began to replace magic as the go-to for medical science. Nowadays, we have rigorous methods to verify the effectiveness of what we put into our bodies. The Vikings would have a hard time pulling off such a con today. In games and movies, Viking longhouses look pretty cool, right? Cozy interior, warm hearth fire, fur-based rugs and sheets, and quite a naval-style fabulous architecture. But what we don't get to see in the movies is what an utter pile of health hazards these longhouses were. These cool-looking Viking longhouses were constructed in a way that encouraged the collection of fine particles of nitrogen dioxide and carbon monoxide. You know, the stuff we make special detectors to warn us about so we don't die snoring. Even though Vikings had holes in the roof to let the smoke out, the architecture of the house rendered those holes very ineffective for ventilation. The inverted boat-like roof design was actually a trap for smoke to stay inside the house, and once it cooled, the soot would rain upon the floor like snow on Christmas. Now add in the farts and mess that their cattle produced. Fun fact, Vikings would keep the cattle in the same longhouse that they lived in. Vikings had a special bond with their farm animals. All the goats, horses, and cows would sleep right next to them. And there you have it, the perfect cocktail to asphyxiate yourself with carbon monoxide. Short-term exposure wasn't that bad for their health. The problem was the overexposure that Viking women and children endured for a good number of years. They would suffer from respiratory infections, bronchitis, cerebrovascular disease, and worst of all, cancer. Even if you are unaware of the legacy of Vikings, watching this video must have made it abundantly clear how much Vikings loved violence. And though one might assume that sports and recreational activities could be a good way to help them take a break from it, ironically, their sports would make modern sports like UFC and the Super Bowl look like ballet. For instance, the Viking swimming race wasn't about swimming faster, but who could waterboard their opponent longer. Even innocent games like catch and tag could turn bloody any second, and it was considered extremely normal. Vikings' rules was that one can stop playing anytime they want, so if they stayed in the game long enough to get hurt, it'd be their own fault. Also, one should pray that a battle must end on the playing field, or it would cultivate into blood feuds that may last long enough to consume multiple generations. So, what do you think? Has your perception of Vikings changed? Do you want to play a little death tag? Tell us in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching Nutty History.